From the campus of Franklin and Marshall College, this is the Susquehanna Valley Forum for the Democratic Candidates for Governor, organized by WGAL-TV, PennLive, The Patriot News, Lancaster Newspapers, Lancaster Online, and Franklin and Marshall Center for Politics and Public Affairs.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kim Lemon, and I'm a news anchor for WGAL, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Susquehanna Valley Forum. This is your chance to hear from the men and women who are running for the Democratic nomination for governor in the May 20th primary. Franklin and Marshall College is our host tonight, and here is a message from the college president, Dr. Daniel Porterfield.
I'm proud to welcome the candidates, our in-house audience, and all of you who are watching tonight's discussion of issues important to the future of Pennsylvania. Franklin and Marshall College has proudly served the Commonwealth for more than 2 centuries, and we are delighted to host this discussion this evening. Thank you for joining us.
And we're grateful to be here. Thank you. And this evening, Dr. Terry Madonna, the director of the Center for Politics and Public Affairs, will be moderating the forum. Reporters from each of the participating organizations will ask questions. From WGAL News 8 on Your Side government reporter Pete Muntean. From Lancaster Newspapers, Lancaster Online, politics and government reporter Karen Shuey. From PennLive, The Patriot News opinion editor John Mysick. But before we hear from the candidates, let's learn more about them.
Rob McCord grew up in Montgomery County. He went to Harvard and the University of Pennsylvania. He worked in the business community and took office as Pennsylvania Treasurer in 2009. He lives in Montgomery County with his wife and 2 sons. Katie grew up in Philadelphia. She went to St. Joseph's University and Columbia University. Under President Bill Clinton, she served as chair of the White House Council of Environmental Quality. In 2003, she became the head of the State Department of Environmental Protection. She is married with 3 daughters and lives in Chester County. Allison Schwartz went to Simmons College and Bryn Mawr College. She was the acting commissioner of the Philadelphia City Department of Human Services. Schwartz served in the Pennsylvania Senate from 1990 to 2004, and right now she is in her 5th term representing the 13th District in Washington. She lives in Montgomery County and is married with 2 sons and 1 granddaughter. Tom Wolfe grew up in York County and graduated from Dartmouth, the University of London, and MIT. He worked for the family kitchen cabinet business. In 2006, he became the State Secretary of Revenue. Wolfe is married with 2 daughters and lives in York County.
And welcome to all of you tonight. Dr. Madonna, let's begin.
Thank you, Kim. All right, applaud. Thank you. This is a 90-minute session. There will be no opening by the candidates. Journalists will ask each of the candidates question in rotating order, rotating through the candidates. First question will go to a particular candidate. The others may respond if they want. The journalist may follow up, and there's no time limit, except when I interrupt to say, let's move on. There'll be, if one of the candidates references another candidate, I'm certainly going to give that candidate immediately after that an opportunity to respond, which is the only fair thing to do. At the conclusion of the forum, each of the candidates will have a 1-minute closing. We are ready to begin. The first question from John Mysick to Rob McCord.
Treasurer McCord, good evening. Thanks for coming. In a recent letter on PennLive, your stepbrother questioned an approach you take in your campaign ad about your relationship with your stepfather. For the audience here, I wonder if you'd like to clarify that relationship with your stepfather.
Sure.
First, and then second, use that experience to sort of talk about your background overcoming adversity. Like, if you could talk about what that taught you coming into this race.
Sure. you know, the main thing that it taught me, to start with the headline, is not everybody should have as much luck as I had in order to have a shot at having their dreams come true. I got exceptionally lucky. One of the sad things I learned from the letter is I'm fonder of Danny than I guess he is of me. We hadn't spoken in a decade, but clearly he's upset with me. But I think he also, because I have 10 siblings, I have my father was married 3 times, and my mother was married twice. You know, some would call it a little like Beirut, my family tree, and my wife Lee jokes that we put the fun back in dysfunctional in some wings of our family. But it taught me a lot, and I did my share of shuttle diplomacy, et cetera. But what happened was, I think my stepbrother thought I wasn't talking about my stepfather, when in fact I've talked about him not once or twice, but hundreds of times. And what I had featured in the ad was focusing on my mom and on her single years. I talk about having been raised by a single mom, and when I'm with a live crowd, I'm able to say she was married when she had me. There are a lot of people who never have a father. She went through a tough divorce when I was 4 years old. And by the time I was 11, and by the time I was 15, I was fantastic. By the time I was 11, I was lucky. By the time I was 15, I was fantastic. And as you and I have talked about, I say that all over the place. But when I was 4, what happened is I watched my mom suddenly drop out of economic security. So not many women born in 1930 went to college at all, let alone to a place like Stanford. And my mom was in great shape. She had helped to put my father through graduate school. He had gotten tenured at a really young age. Here we are at a great university, and you know, we know what early tenure, he's tenured at the age of 31, can be like. But like a lot of sort of Scotch-Irish types, in addition to being smart and charismatic and athletic, he was also alcoholic. She kicked him out, and she almost got evicted. She got threatened. A union actually helped her stay in the house, and she lost her job. And you know, what happened is a union helped her stay in the house. She was able to hang on, get another job, get her PhD, pretty late in life for back then. And the first 5 years that my mom was divorced, I didn't know any other kids who were the kid of divorce. I mean, it was sort of the big D defined us. But also there was just a ton of financial insecurity. And my mom moved, not to New York, but to Pennsylvania to chase public education. She was told there's a great public education system here. She had a younger son with undiagnosed dyslexia. I kept thinking I was smarter than they were saying I was, and maybe I'm not that smart because I'm running for higher office, but public education rescued me. I got very lucky, and that's what I've been trying to highlight.
You all can comment if you prefer on that. Anybody else want to? No childhood, no references to.
Here's a story.
Anybody?
Want us to talk about
Yeah, it wasn't the Brady Bunch.
about Rob's
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, comment on my story at length.
Well,
yeah.
Let me go then to John to ask if there's a follow-up, and then any of the other.
But I just want to drill
Sure.
down a bit further on that. I mean, the thrust of your stepbrother's letter was that the advert made scant mention of your stepfather and seemed to sort of write him out of your story. And do you understand his objection to that, and maybe the misperception in that advertisement that, you know, your single mother, sort of hard scrabble upbringing?
Yeah, I mean, I've been very clear. I grew up on Montgomery Avenue in Montgomery County in one of the best school districts, not just in the state, but in the country, in Lower Merion. So I always, once my mom moved, and you know, honestly, Danny just didn't know me during those years. And I don't think there's some minimum amount of years of time when economic fear, when economic insecurity afflicts you, that makes it not part of your story. And in fact, we looked it up, and there's one professor at Washington University who says that 40% of Americans are going to drop into poverty for at least 1 year between the age of 20 and 65. And it's that fear of a sudden dip that I think is so relevant. And we make a lot of ads, and I give a lot of speeches. And if the journalism industry were as well funded as it was 20 years ago, people would have heard dozens of stories about how my stepfather helped me, how when they first started driving around and I realized, my mom said, is it okay if I go on another date with him? I said, my brother was thinking about it wisely. He's a philosophy professor now. And I hit him in the arm and I say, Mom, he took us out to Chinese food and his car had air conditioning. What's not to love about this guy? So, from the age of 4 to 11, we went through a tough time. People either think that's relevant or it's not.
No follow-up, I see. Next question, Karen Shuey to Kate McGinty.
In 2005, as Secretary of the DEP, you fast-tracked a permit for a coal waste plant in western Pennsylvania. As a candidate, you have accepted $120,000 from an executive behind that project. Have you returned the money, and how does that square with your call for government reform?
Well, thanks, Karen, and thanks everybody for being here tonight, and to Franklin and Marshall for continuing to provide great service to young kids and giving them a shot at a brilliant future. Two things I think are really important in the issue you raise. First is, if your issue is the environment, if you're concerned in terms of, for example, the air quality reports that we just got, and many communities in Pennsylvania got a failing grade. And we know what that means in terms of asthma for our kids, in terms of lost school days, in terms of lost opportunity. If that's your issue, then I am your candidate. For 25 years, I've dedicated my life to protection, preservation of the environment, while finding ways to create jobs, smart environmental policy, driving innovation. I'm proud to be endorsed in this race by Al Gore. Bobby Kennedy Jr. came to Pennsylvania last week to endorse me, a leader in environmental protection. The permit that you're talking about, I'll tell you, if you want to hire somebody who thinks that the status quo is okay, that slow bureaucracy is okay, that a laggard state is okay, I am not your gal. You know, when I am hired to run a department, I'm going to run it so that this Commonwealth can move. The environment is not helped when good projects that help to protect and clean up the environment get buried under a mound of paperwork. If you want status quo and whatever happens, you've got that in Tom Corbett, and we have fallen to the back of the line in terms of job creation. You know, my record is one. When I was secretary, we won national and international acclaim for being a leading state, renewable energy, a leading state in energy efficiency, in reducing toxic pollution. And we did that while I was proud, with many people participating, to create 3,000 new jobs in Pennsylvania at the same time. We were #1 in the manufacture of wind energy when I was secretary. We were #2 in solar energy. And we led the country in energy efficient buildings. It's a record I'm proud of, and it's what I'll bring to the governor's office too. Vision, drive, determination, let's move.
Any follow-ups here? Go ahead.
Did you
Karen.
get $120,000 from an executive behind that branch? And you've been out almost in front of the ethics issue here. So how does that square with what you've called for?
Well, listen, I am very proud of the diverse support I have in this campaign. I've also been supported by all the leadership in the renewable energy industry. I referenced Al Gore and Bobby Kennedy Jr. I've also received support from those who were the founders and the pioneers in the United States in founding our leading environmental organizations. So the support you see for me is diverse. Now, is that relevant to the job qualifications I hope people are looking for? It is. Why? Because we've had too much polarization, we've had too much gridlock, we've had too many times that politics becomes a blood sport. That's not what I'm about. Listen, I have a strong vision for Pennsylvania, but I'm not here to just talk about it. I'm here to bring the warring factions that have caused gridlock in Washington and have caused this great superpower to come to a standstill, not able to handle or tackle tough issues.
Thanks.
Similarly in Harrisburg. So what you see is diverse support, and it's demonstrative of what I'm about, which is bringing people together, finding the common ground, solving problems, and moving.
Thank you. We have a follow-up, and then we'll let any of you else respond.
I think I'm going to try to ask that question one more time. Less than a month ago, you were standing in the Capitol Rotunda loudly denouncing the too close relationship between state government and special interests. Here we have an instance of a regulator accepting donations from the regulated. How is that any different from what you've been decrying?
Oh, John, listen, what we're talking about here is campaign finance. Now, I've also been very loudly speaking to the need for complete, total, 100% campaign finance reform. Listen, being out there and not being a person who has a trust fund, not being a person who has decades of political machinery behind me, yeah, I have to work and to build the resources to put myself forward to the people of Pennsylvania with the vision and the work that I hope to bring forward. But the money in politics is not a good thing. I think we should reform it top to bottom. But I also don't want to confuse it, though, with what I was also speaking to in Harrisburg. Look, when we've got politicians out there taking envelopes full of cash, and Harrisburg bestirs itself only to say, well, we'll stop doing that. But if somebody gives me an envelope full of first-class tickets to Hawaii, oh, that's going to be fine. Well, clearly it's not fine. And we need 100%, no exceptions, no footnote, no asterisk, ban on gifts in politics.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, what are some of your,
Well, we got
the other candidates, same question as
Sure.
how you
So
feel about
first of all,
campaign?
you ought to absolutely ban any elected official from touching cash. I'll be frank, I thought it was illegal before. It took this episode, and the people of Pennsylvania need always to go to the work through voting to hire people, meaning the elected officials, whom they think have a baseline of being ethical, because there's no circumnavigating the need for basic individual human ethics. But we ought to be banning any kind of cash at all, and we ought to be banning gifts. It's pretty straightforward stuff. The sad thing, and you know, you highlight this, and I'll defend Katie here. I've known Katie for years. I just don't think she would be influenced in government by a hefty campaign contribution. But till we have campaign finance reform, guess what we're going to have? The appearance issues, right? There's no escaping them. Once you're the Democratic nominee, you have 50,000 people you've never met before eager to finance your campaign against Tom Corbett. But until we get there, we're all faced with these challenges. I mean, I worked for years as a self-made business leader. My wife and I are risking a lot of capital in this race. You know, it's a frustration. And so you play by the rules at hand. It'd be nice if we changed the rules, and campaign finance reform is
Allison,
a
do you want
piece
to
of it.
respond to that? Go ahead.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about campaign finance reform and also ethics reform in Harrisburg. First of all, let me say I am very proud of the fact that there are 10,000 people, most of them in Pennsylvania, who have given me a campaign contribution. Average contribution is $250. It's a whole lot of people who want me to get to be governor because they believe in me. They believe I will bring a very different kind of leadership and an experience and proven, tested leadership that no one else on the stage has. And I'm very proud of that. And it is work to do that. It is reaching out to people and encouraging them to give and being clear about, well, there might be some people I wouldn't take a contribution from. I have to say that. Sometimes I don't think they would offer it to me, but I think that I also would be pretty clear about who I wouldn't take it from, because I don't want to make it messy, you know, or I don't want to be beholden in any way. But no question, 10,000 people should protect me in not one person. But I do actually believe in, and actually as a member of Congress for 10 years, I have had, my campaign giving is limited. That's not a small amount, but it's limited. I think we should take those same kind of federal limits and you apply them on the state level. I don't think it shouldn't be hard to do. I think unlimited contributions is not appropriate. And I think that I'm glad there's at least disclosure on that. But we should implement those new rules. And as governor, I would do all I could to make sure there is campaign finance reform. Let me just speak to the ethics piece, which is also in some ways connected, but also a little bit different. There have been some recent concerns that have been raised, and appropriately so. Of course we shouldn't let any elected official take cash, or anything in an envelope that you don't understand what it is. I mean, that's completely unacceptable. And we didn't have strong enough laws to prosecute these folks. That's terrible. We have to do something about that. What I would do as governor is be very clear about this. I would, first of all, make it have better rules, stronger rules, not just rules of disclosure about no gifts, but I would also appoint an integrity officer, and I would put that office in the Capitol so that elected officials and members of the executive branch would have to walk by and be reminded almost on a daily basis that this is somebody who's on the watch and is going to watch what they're doing. I would make sure that everyone in the executive branch and every elected officer had to go through an annual ethics review so that they would know, understanding what the rules are, so no one can say, I didn't know. And they'd have to sign off and say they did that. So we should do this in a way that is really transparent and really clear and set that. And as a governor, you have to be absolutely clear about this. And one more point I will make. When I was in the state Senate, I watched people, other electeds, stand up and defend people who had actually been corrupt. Some who were on the way to jail. And they said, well, he was a good guy. He did good things for his constituents. I've known him. Let's get up a defense fund. Let's protect him. And you know, I found it appalling. I did, because I think that even if we know them, even if we work with them, if they have broken the public trust, if they have broken the law, if they're going to go to jail, or they come out of jail, then you need to be able to stand up. You have to stand up. And as governor, you have to be willing to stand up and say,
Okay.
they may be my friend, but I'm not going to protect
Thank you.
that behavior or that corruption. And I have to say that, Tom, when you stood by someone who was come out of jail and was found not only indicted but found guilty and then went to jail, it's how do you stand up then and say, I'm going to make sure there isn't corruption anywhere in my administration or anywhere in the Capitol when you pick and choose who you will excuse that behavior.
Tom,
I think that's an issue.
Tom, your turn to respond.
Well, thank you. I guess a couple of things before I get to that. I would like to point out that and I sound somewhat hypocritical here, but I think money is too important in election campaigns right now. I'm a self-funder. I put a lot of my money in, not all of it, but 2/3 of the campaign contributions in my campaign come from me and my wife, and we have contributed that, by the way. We did not make a loan to the campaign. But I think money does play too great a role. This is a citizen-based democracy, and we need to make it easier for citizens to run for public office. Citizens who have not necessarily become wealthy. Citizens who have not been in public life and have created name recognition or don't have the power of incumbency. So we need to make sure that we have some way of doing that. My campaign finance reform proposals as governor would be to change the rules very dramatically, to put campaign limits on where there are none right now, as Allison pointed out, to actually create a public funding source so that people who don't have a great amount of money can have matching funds if they have broad support in the public. I think we need to change that and make sure that we have a role for citizens who want to run, who can produce and contribute something to public life without having a lot of money to invest in the campaign or a lot of name recognition. We need to do that. Second, to Allison's point, she's talking about Steve Stetler, who is a lifelong friend of mine. I grew up with him in York County, and he was, in fact, accused and convicted of a crime when he was state representative. And he is a friend of mine. And I, along with 150 other people in York County, put together a legal defense fund for him. And a number of us, including Governor Rendell, served as character witnesses at his trial. Steve Stetler is still a friend of mine. I think he was a good representative, and the Steve Stetler I know is a good human being. And so I did what I thought was right. But I think if you want to look at my view of ethics, I think you ought to look at what I've done. When I was Secretary of Revenue, and I'm not saying anybody else should do this, but I could afford to do this, but when I was Secretary of Revenue, I didn't take any of the benefits or any of the perks. I paid my own way on state business. I even sometimes paid for other people to travel on state business. That's what I did. I gave my compensation back to charity. I drove my Jeep, that ratty Jeep you see in the ads. I drove that. And so, in fact, I even put everything I had into a blind trust, all my assets, my wife and I. Using a Maryland statute because Pennsylvania doesn't have one. I did that on my own. That's how I view ethics, and that's how I would view ethics if I were governor of Pennsylvania. Okay.
Could I just, if I may, just for a moment, I mean, I think the fact that you could afford to do that makes it possible. It sort of sets a standard that most of us couldn't afford to do. And as you just said, if you want people to serve in public life who are not multimillionaires, why set that as a standard? It's, you know, I mean, it was good you did it, but that's not a standard that most Pennsylvanians could apply. They want to work in public service, you ought to pay them decently. But secondly, I think that the issue still stands about you're raising money so that former Representative Steve Stetler could overturn his indictment so he can get his pension. I voted to make sure that people couldn't get their pensions after they had violated the public trust and their public office. So would you stand up to reverse that so that everyone could get their pension afterwards, or are you going to pick and choose who you believe are the right people who could get their pensions if you didn't agree with their indictment?
All right, we'll let Tom Wolf respond, and then we'll move on to Pete. Go ahead, Tom.
Okay, there's a lot of nonsense there. First of all, I'm not used to apologizing for not having taken any perks or benefits while I was Secretary of Revenue. I'm sorry, I didn't. Second thing is that I think Steve Stetler is actually trying to get justice for himself. I fully support the idea that if someone is duly convicted of a crime, he shouldn't get, or she shouldn't get a pension from the state. So I'm fine with that. This is not an attempt to overturn that. Yeah.
Stetler.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to move on. Pete Montine for Allison Schwartz.
This is a pretty high-octane discord that you're going about back and forth with here. What does that say about your ability to get things done in Harrisburg if you're attacking Mr. Wolf for, I mean, I think people want to know, how will you get stuff done in Harrisburg? And what you're bringing up, what does that say about that?
Oh, well, actually, to suggest that we cannot hold each other to a high standard is actually challenging and inappropriate. I would challenge that. I think the fact is that as elected official, any of us, as governor, we should stand for the highest standards, and we should have high expectations. And yes, I think it's even appropriate, and I hope we would call on a colleague and say, you know, what you're doing is wrong, stop doing it. Would that be so terrible? I actually think that's exactly what happens now, is that it doesn't happen now, that should, which is people say, oh, watch, not you, Kate, sorry, but you know, I'll do it this way. This is hypothetical, exactly. Oh, what you're doing, but I'll just look the other way. That is exactly what goes on too often, that people look the other way and don't call their colleagues on the fact that that's not appropriate behavior. That doesn't mean that, in fact, I've gotten a lot of legislation done, I've gotten a lot of work done, and of course I've done that by building relationships with other Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate. As governor, I will use that experience. I mean, I have terrific proven experience in being able to get things done, and the fact is that you do that also by challenging sometimes the status quo. You do. And sometimes you have to push to get things done. And you know, at the end of the day, if it's done well, everyone's going to take credit for it, and that's fine too.
Okay. Terry, can I beg the question?
Terry,
Yeah, hold on.
Terry, you're losing control here, so I'd like to help you lose control. Let me just, I mean, this is
We're trying to have a discussion here.
Yeah, this is a discussion, and let me get back to, I think.
Did you get a question?
Yeah, I
No,
think
we're going to
I
let
just
Tom,
like to
hold on,
maybe
we're going to
opine
let
on
Tom respond, and then we're going to, if Rob and Katie want to respond, we'll let them do it, and then we'll go back to Pete. Go ahead.
Evidently, they're seeing the same polls I am, that I'm way ahead, so I have a bullseye on my back here, and I think you have basically emerging two contrasting styles. And to your point, I'm not sure this style actually is what we're looking for. This is the same style of negative attack politics that actually gets you to the point where we have the dysfunction we disparage in Washington and Harrisburg. We are not going to govern if this is what we want to do. We want to tear other people down. We want to get to the point where we're actually governing, we're leading, we're doing something different. I think I have a different story to tell, and I'm coming from a different perspective, and I have a contrasting style, and that is, let's look at what Pennsylvania ought to be doing in the future. Let's look at what we can do. Let's look at this as a positive way. I'm not here to tear other people down. I mean, apologizing for not... Well, exactly.
It's a different style, but it's doing the same.
No, except you're asking me to apologize for not taking benefits at
No, I didn't ask you to
All right,
apologize.
hold on.
That's a misunderstanding of what
Rob
you
McCord.
heard, and you are
We're
turning that just the same way. And look, let's be clear about this. It is very important, and this is why we're here, is for you not to just ask us issues about questions about where we stand on the issues, but to get a sense of us. You know, so I think it's really inappropriate for you to say, oh, I wouldn't ever accuse anything, and then turn around and sort of be a little bit, at me, so, or, come on.
Okay.
And it's really appropriate. It's not inappropriate, and I can take it,
You made your
it's
point.
fine.
I think we all understand the point.
All right,
and
let's do it.
Here's
Let's
what we're
move
going
on
to
to
do.
a
We're going to
real
go
question.
Rob
That's fine.
and then Katie, and go ahead.
Sure. So first, Pete, I think I want to make sure we capture the heart of the question, which is how do we get things done in Harrisburg? First, we have to defeat and evict Tom Corbett. I mean, I think he has the wrong priorities. He's proven that he's not engaged. And I had this silly notion that time on task and actually having done some work in an area, experiences, helps give you experience, more experienced journalists, et cetera. Some experience running for office. I'm hoping people find relevant, the Corbett Slayer background. But second, I'm very proud, and I say this in the middle of a Democratic primary, that I've managed to reach out successfully, as has Katie, as has Allison, to the other side of the aisle frequently. We talked, I remember, about my successful fight around the crony capitalist attempt to privatize the lottery. That was a team sport. right? I started the conversation. There would have been no way for anybody else to have standing had we not checked the bill at Treasury, written a letter saying we believe that this is at the very best not the right thing to do, and at worst illegal. But then in addition to Eugene DePasquale and then Kathleen Kane agreeing with me, I had bipartisan conversations, including with Senator John Rafferty, whom I think has been on the right of a lot, correct on a lot of issues where Governor Corbett's been wrong. And he was one of the ones who checked in the Republican caucus, making it suddenly legal to do that which they had just found illegal. There's an old joke. If you want to make something illegal legal, get 10 rich people to want to do it, right? So the fact is getting good work done is a team sport. And you do need to invest time and respect and expertise and understanding. And you need to listen to both sides of the issue. You need to think about it from the other side of the aisle's point of view. I will highlight, though, that is not the same as saying, let's send Mr. Rogers to Washington and everybody will just say, well, I'm a nice guy, so everything will work perfectly. People who've really studied Harrisburg for decades, and nobody's been more studious than our moderator, say, sometimes you gotta be a little tough. I mean, the person who sticks out for me, and I won't go into it at length, is the racist behavior of Charlie Robertson. I think you do the right thing there. There is a time when the elected leader has to make tough calls. Part of leading is sometimes making yourself or somebody you like uncomfortable. And I think that combination of being able to be the happy warrior, to be the persuasive person, to be the listener, but also having a firm line you will not cross is part of leadership.
Thank you. Katie.
Listen, I think this is at the heart of the matter. We're looking at statistics where we have fallen from 7th to 48th in job creation, and we are just a day before yesterday, none other than Standard & Poor's has put us as a Commonwealth on notice that Tom Corbett's leadership, his budget, his pension ideas are gimmicks, and that we stand in jeopardy of seeing our bond rating taken down. You bet we need somebody who can get in there and can get stuff done for the people of Pennsylvania. For me, it's about jobs and it's about education. And I come with that experience that is about building those bridges, finding the common ground. So in 2003, when I became secretary, I had the idea that the world was beginning to invest and want renewable energy. Now everybody said to me, listen, we're the 4th leading coal-producing state in the United States. You've got a Republican legislature. They're not going for windmills. But I thought if we could turn the conversation around and make it about jobs, I could find the common ground. By October 2004, we became the first industrial state to pass legislation, bipartisan, that had a market and a growing market for renewables in Pennsylvania. And at the end of my tenure, we were #1 in the country in jobs, in manufacturing wind turbines, and #2 in solar, 3,000 manufacturing jobs. Now, I will tell you, I'm also glad about that bipartisan goodwill that I built in passing that legislation. Why? Because ideological Tom Corbett, who thinks only one flavor of energy, fossil fuels and shale, is worthy of support, has actively tried to kill those renewable energy jobs. And guess what? Republicans as well as Democrats have stood up and spoken out against his continued desire and effectiveness in taking us in the wrong direction.
Thank you, Katie. Next
I have
question.
a bit of a follow-up, actually, Terry.
Go ahead.
When it comes to the governor's budget, there's a projection that says that he might be $1 billion short when June 30th comes around.
Correct.
How would, I'm opening this up to all of you, but very briefly, how would you deal with that scenario if you were handed that?
Expand Medicaid and save the Commonwealth $500 million day one while protecting 600,000 Pennsylvanians. Stop your ideological drive to sell off the liquor stores and instead make that common ground on modernizing those liquor stores. That's $100 million.
All right,
Allison, you have an idea, too.
and then we'll
I was going to say, just quickly, because I'm happy to answer this question as well. This is about moving forward, and budgets are really a question of priorities and values, and it takes a governor to set those out. Look, Tom Corbett has dug us into a hole because he has been ideologically driven to say no new revenues, no matter what, and he is really not done and funded what we need to do to grow the economy in Pennsylvania. And what that includes, of course, is support for education and job training and being able to make sure that we have keep building on the wonderful workforce that we have. We cannot do that without a skilled workforce and an educated population, cutting $1 billion out of education. But he's been so ideologically driven that he won't do an extraction tax on the energy companies and the drillers who actually could give us 5%. Some discussion about exactly what the number is, but give us 5%. Not give us, demand that they give us 5% and use that money to invest in education and infrastructure, particularly significant new transformational ideas and projects, and use it to grow the economy across the state. We have great assets and great resources in the state, and this governor is not seizing those opportunities, and that starts with that vision of what you're going to do to make sure that we're going to grow the economy by making the right kind of investments in education, in infrastructure, and in the great assets that we have in this state.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, I think it comes down to two things, management and vision. So what have we gotten for this austerity budget, this austerity approach? We've hollowed out schools, we've lost jobs, 100,000 just last year. We have given away the store to the drillers, and we have a system that benefits people who know people in power in Harrisburg. This system is not built to work, and it hasn't worked. So this deficit should be no surprise. This is the result of a state that simply isn't working, and it's not working because he doesn't know how to lead or manage or provide a vision for a state that could work.
And Pete, just trying to advance the conversation and connect the dots about getting things done. I think there's a lot of room for innovation and reform. Obviously, I'm much more aggressive on the driller's tax. I don't think we ought to be leaving hundreds of millions of dollars a year on the table. And I think the people of Pennsylvania want to hire a tested negotiator to go get the highest, best price for the ultimate stakeholders who own this natural resource and want to not only see their counties protected, we would hold harmless the revenue from the local impact fee, but would like to see full and fair funding and investment funding in a long-term asset. But let's say, and I face this question off, let's take it takes half a year to get that done, to make the number climb from 5 to 10%, or certainly that's what I would be coming to the table asking for. There's room, as Katie suggests, through innovation at the liquor control system and bipartisan agreement to find $110 million a year. There's room to find a couple $100 million improving the quality of care for senior citizens using new technologies and allowing seniors and those of us who want to become seniors to stay in our homes longer while not being forced into institutions. Again, a couple $100 million a year. There's innovation in procurement reform. My experience, I haven't been in Harrisburg long, 5.5 years, but long enough to get bipartisan respect, which you can look up on the Appropriations Committee hearings, and to prove that we can do more with less. 22% smaller budget, 62% more revenue, fully repairing the college savings plan. That kind of financial discipline, being socially progressive and fiscally responsible, is something that I believe there's now a bipartisan appetite for, and we would find the revenues and not embrace fantasy island finance the way Tom Corbett has.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on quickly.
Just, yeah.
Okay, look,
I mean, Tom Corbett has the opportunity today, right now, to do two things. Realize savings for the people of Pennsylvania and do what is right for the people of Pennsylvania. How about dropping the absolutely unacceptable lawsuit trying to prevent people from being able to vote? Right. Get rid of the voter ID law. Millions of our tax dollars have gone to try to keep people out and away from the polls. How about dropping the lawsuit that is continuing to defend a provision in Pennsylvania law, Tom Corbett's shale gas law, that imposes a gag order on physicians and tells them they cannot speak if they're concerned that fracking chemicals are adversely impacting health. There is no room for that in a democracy. I don't want a penny of my tax dollars going to defend that. And how about letting our brothers and sisters in the LGBT community to have the dignity of marriage? It is their right, and Tom Corbett should drop his lawsuit against them as well.
okay, John Misick for Tom Wolf.
All right, I'm going to change gears for a couple minutes here. Mr. Wolf, the other night, the state of Oklahoma made headlines as it botched the execution of an inmate using a cocktail of 3 untested chemicals. Pennsylvania has not executed a death row inmate since 1999. Ask you first, sir, if you think that the death penalty is an effective deterrent and should stay on the books. And if the answer to that is no, would you support its abolition in Pennsylvania?
And I've said this before, I would support a moratorium on the death penalty if I were elected governor. I have grave concerns about whether it's effective as a deterrent. I have grave concerns about its expense, and I have grave concerns because I think the way it's imposed is deeply biased and prejudiced. I'm troubled by that. So I would impose a moratorium.
Go here, Rob.
the candidates?
You want to respond to the
Yeah, sure. I
question?
mean, this is an area where we have agreement. You're 14 times more likely to be put to death for the same kind of crime if you're poor and African American. You know, I would, however, embrace a conversation with the prosecutorial community because they do use it in negotiations. And we want robust sentence reform top to bottom. We had a bunch of elected officials, primarily in the 80s and early 90s, sort of saying, let's you and him fight, and people trying to prove how tough they were, and having and taking away judicial judgment from judges in ways that now cost taxpayers hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars. So we need sentencing reform top to bottom.
Katie,
Yeah,
and
I
then we'll
too
go to Allison.
have said that, one, I am skeptical of a deterrent effect, in large part because in so many instances, these horrific crimes are committed in the context of an individual with serious mental health issues. And so as part of the conversation, I think we also need to restore those dollars that have been very severely cut from behavioral and mental health services. I think we also, though, need to take some extra steps. As I travel the Commonwealth, I am concerned about crime in our communities and in our streets. And I have proposed this week an initiative that would enable us to have more community-based police officers on the street. I think we are looking at, in issues like heroin and meth, the potential, if we don't get in front of it, of a very serious crime issue that will very adversely affect many people, including our young people. But in terms of the death penalty, I would like to see a moratorium, a dialogue, till we can see if what the right path is. And I am concerned, again, that we have taken away the tools that could stop these crimes and these tragedies from happening and not addressing the root causes of some of those crimes.
Allison, George.
Yeah, I actually am opposed to the death penalty. I think that it's well known that it is not a deterrent. It is certainly the absolute punishment, and there's some feeling for that. I understand that, but the fact is that it is costly. There are real questions about the bias in which it's applied. And those questions have been raised and answered in many ways. And then, in fact, it's costly because of all the appeals. And look, there are heinous crimes. And as governor, I want to see people punished. And I do think there are people who should never get out of jail. So their death sentence should be dying in jail. Lifetime sentence without the opportunity for parole is absolutely acceptable to me, and in fact, important to me. Because there are some people who cannot be trusted, nor should they ever be outside a jail cell. So I'm for that. But in fact, I think the death penalty, because it is not applied fairly, that there are people who have been discovered on death row who discovered to have been innocent. That's pretty daunting, you know. And certainly what happened in Oklahoma, the fact that how can you do this humanely is even being questioned now. I think that actually raises just additional questions. So I think this is not easy for us, but I would be willing to sign a piece of legislation that would end the death penalty in Pennsylvania.
John, you have a follow-up.
Yeah, I'll just put that same question to the remaining three of you. Yes or no, support or oppose? Start with Mr. McCord.
I would start with the moratorium and talking to the prosecutors. The moratorium seems appropriate to me because we have absolute evidence of the bias in the way it's being administered, and I would want to embrace a bipartisan conversation, keep the focus on investing in job creation and education, not have too many additional arguments in that first year.
Okay, so that's yes or no?
Okay.
Yeah, that's a moratorium, yes. And I don't know the answer until after I've embraced the quest for evidence. There are some who say that having some kind of death penalty incentive, particularly for people who are running gun gangs around drug dealing, is a real deterrent. And I also, to use a philosophical term, I'm a bit of a retributivist. I actually believe that sometimes punishment is warranted. And so, you know, I think Charlie Robertson should have been punished. You know, so I don't want to just back away from the complexity of the issue.
Yeah, John, same. I mean, when I say I want to see a moratorium and I want to see a discussion about do we have adequate resources in representing criminals in imposing the death penalty? Are we affecting any kind of deterrent? As I said, my instinct, what I've seen, what I've read, makes me skeptical of that. but I know others hold a different point of view. And on an issue like this, yeah, I meant what I said in terms of I think we should sit down and review those issues, and I would have a moratorium in place as we explore
And
those
there's room
issues.
for bipartisan agreement on this, like in Illinois.
This is not a Republican or Democratic issue. This is,
My dancing
okay.
feet are beginning to hurt here. Is that yes or no, you support or oppose it?
You know, the good news is I don't work for you, so what I'm telling you is what I actually believe, and I don't dance to a yes or no bear drum beat. I'm telling you I would embrace a moratorium. I'd engage in a quest for evidence, a bipartisan conversation
Tom. Hold on.
to fight the bigotry in the process.
All right, Tom Wolf, it's up to you, then we'll come back, cycle back through. Tom?
Yes or no?
As I said, I support a moratorium until we figure out what we want to do.
Allison, go
Yeah,
ahead.
that I actually was in the state Senate when we went through some of the period that Rob was talking about, where under governor who ran on tough on crime, and we're going to hold juveniles responsible for if they do adult crime. I mean, was actually a lot of misunderstanding about how to deal with juveniles and what really should happen. Yes, they have to be punished. How do you actually assess that? And we did 3 strikes you're out. We did a whole lot of very strict sentencing rules, many of which have put a whole lot of people in jail who might have actually been able to be rehabilitated with job training and may have made, we're not talking about the death penalty here, we're not talking about those heinous crimes, but we're talking about other levels of really strict incarceration that has actually led to just huge expenses for the state and a whole system of people being in jail who don't really have a lot of options when they get out. So we do need to look very seriously, and this is bipartisan. There are Republicans bringing this up and Democrats. I think there's real opportunity. You're hearing that dialogue already in Harrisburg with the right governor who really understands this to get right to work on the issues where we can start to look at alternative sentencing and ways that you can make sure that particularly those who are really have the lowest level of crimes to be able to be given a chance, and certainly juveniles. You said I was the head of the Department of Human Services. Under the Department of Human Services in Philadelphia, it included juvenile delinquency. And it's tough. Some of these young people have committed really, terrible crimes, and some have not. And we need to make that distinction, and we need to be able to treat them appropriately and not make them lifetime criminals. And sometimes that happens. So I would get to work working on this issue to make sure we get incarceration right.
All right, we're going to move on. Karen Shuey, question for Rob McCord.
Treasurer McCord, this is a question that many, many readers of Lancaster newspapers are wondering. There's a growing movement to eliminate property taxes to fund public education. Would you support that effort? And if you do support it, how would you make up that revenue?
Right. I think, first of all, people like me who've done pretty well and own expensive property, but now have taken a big pay cut, in my case, to be a public servant, it's a very different for some higher net worth person who owns property than for a senior citizen on a fixed income with a low net worth and a low annual income. So this is another one where I would be for moving in the direction of dramatically reducing our reliance on property taxes and dramatically reducing the burden on senior citizens on fixed income who also have low means. We cannot afford, in my view, simultaneously to invest the full amount that we need in public education, including early childhood learning, universally available pre-K, full-day kindergarten, expand the K through 12 budget to include summer programs, tutoring, after-school programs, more public safety, better community college systems, middle-class grants so that less affluent kids, more of them can go to places like Franklin and Marshall. That's my top priority, and I believe focus and passion are sort of the parents of productivity. So I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. We would reduce the property tax burden, which we must do if we're going to have a fair, what they call funding formula. It's really an investment formula. What's happening now is the total reliance on these property taxes is not only overstressing senior citizens in particular, it's damaging students. So you see in a place like Philadelphia or Chester Upland, a cut of something like $1,300 per student. In a more affluent district, it's $56 per student. So it's clearly wrong-headed and misguided. But you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver and use the word elimination. I think it would be a much more progressive approach over time and less reliance, and the state revenues carrying a larger share of the total education funding.
So you're talking about raising state income
No, what I would, my first many sources, be a big menu, and I don't want to filibuster you, but the driller's tax is an important one. We already are building a bipartisan consensus around a lower number. You want to, elect a negotiator in chief who will get the best price for the people of Pennsylvania, not worry quite so much about the standard set in West Virginia or what the drillers want. Let's get the best driller's price. You hire a real estate agent not to please the buyer, but to please the seller, right? So I would go for a driller's tax. In the meantime, you would see innovation, again, around senior care, procurement reform, and other things to find money, LCB modernization, plug a bunch of loopholes, including the Delaware loophole, the tobacco loophole, the sales rebate loophole. So there's a lot of places to go find revenue that would create property tax relief.
Katie.
Yeah, Karen, I certainly understand the concern that drives the interest in legislation that would take us back from this over-reliance on property taxes. And this is one of those areas that is Exhibit A. If Tom Corbett wants to have us believe that he didn't raise our taxes, you just ask anybody who's seen their property tax bill go through the roof.
Correct.
That is brought to you courtesy of Tom Corbett, who made some decisions. He made a decision when he became governor to say no to what was a bipartisan piece of legislation to impose a reasonable shale severance tax that would have raised the dollars and cents we need to give our kids a chance to invest in our schools. Instead, he said no to that. Now, he's one to have kind of crocodile tears about, well, I didn't have the stimulus. Well, you opposed the stimulus. But he also came into office not with a $4.2 billion revenue deficit, but with a $1.4 billion revenue surplus, and yet he made the decision to cut schools. What I would do in response to this very real concern and huge financial burden on our seniors and working families with respect to property taxes is to step up with the shale gas severance tax that I've proposed and dedicate every penny of that to restoring the deep cuts that we have seen in education. I think that's vital for two reasons. One, we need every penny. When you've lost $1 billion, these taxes would raise about $700 million. Second, we need to keep that bipartisan consensus that I think is out there in every part of the state, Republican and Democrat mom and dads who are very concerned about what they've seen in no more tutors in schools, or no longer having a nurse in school, no longer having counselors. There is a movement there where we can get this priority done, and I would move to do that. But I think we also need, this is part of the revenue equation, but it's a big piece of ensuring that we are doing the best we can for our kids, and that's charter school reform. There are some charters that are performing for kids, and I would stand by them. But listen, when the FBI has to come in, and in Philadelphia alone, raids 18 schools, that's hundreds of millions of dollars being taken from our kids, and yeah, adding to that property tax burden. So charter school reform, also critically important piece of the equation to dial down the pressure on property taxes that have gotten too much burden.
Allison, go
Yeah,
ahead.
the reason there's so much, the issue here about property taxes, the possibility, the suggestion that we eliminate property taxes is really coming straight from the fact that the government, the state government, and Tom Corbett as governor has cut funding for public education. And so yes, local communities do not want their schools to be failing our kids, and so they try and make it up with increases in property taxes support for their schools. And so the answer here is making sure that the governor, the next governor, takes the constitutional responsibility that is the responsibility of the General Assembly and the governor, and that is to fund public education in the state for every child, no matter where they live, and lift that burden off of property taxes. So there would still be local share. I don't have a problem with that coming from property taxes. I would actually increase the rebate for seniors to protect them. I think when they're on fixed incomes, as they're older, I think that's a good thing to be doing. But it is all coming from the fact that the state has cut funding for education. And it is true that you ask any teacher, any student, any parent, they are really deeply concerned about the status of our schools. Property taxes are going up across the state. The status for schools are going down, and that's really hurting those kids, and it's hurting the future of the state. So, of course, there are ways we can fix this. I also have the extraction tax at 5%, bringing in about $650, $700 million in the first years. It's reasonable. There's already a bipartisan support, bicameral, that have already introduced these legislation very similar to my proposal, 5% extraction tax, dedicated mostly to education, but also to infrastructure and to economic growth across the state. That's a great start for us. It's a way that, as governor, I will be able to do this, and that pressure coming from the local school districts is going to help us get it done. And I do believe we will get it done in our first year. It will provide some of that funding. And yes, there are a whole lot of other opportunities if you don't have a rigid ideology like this governor, and if you have leadership and vision, to make sure that we have the dollars to meet our obligations, not only in education, but in the other obligations of our state. And yes, I would, if we'll get a chance to talk about it, I would take that those Medicaid dollars. Sure. They bring real dollars into our state. I worked on the Affordable Care Act, as you may know, from my work, and there are a lot of important benefits to Pennsylvania, including we just heard today that 318,000 people have health insurance today. Took advantage of the Affordable Care Act and the exchange, which is kind of astounding and wonderful. That's what it was for. They were able to get insured. But it also, the report showed that 8 million people in this country were able to get insurance basically through expansion of Medicaid, but not in Pennsylvania.
All right, thank you. Tom, on the property tax, go ahead.
That's an issue I would fix.
Yeah, there are two reasons why I think we need to reduce the reliance on the property tax. I would not go to zero. I would do what Ed Rendell tried to do, which is to, on average, bring the state funding up to 50% from where it is now, 32 to 34% for the funding of public education, and reduce the reliance on the local property tax. We need to produce a reduction for two reasons. The first reason is the heavy reliance on the local property tax actually sets up conflicts that we shouldn't set up. People who have a predisposition to be supportive of education, but because of the way we fund it, because of the heavy reliance on the local property tax, it forces them to actually oppose education. I mean, people who would be predisposed to say, I support the education of your children, but now you're telling me that if I do that, I'm going to be thrown out of my home, then I'm going to have to oppose the education of your children. That's the first reason why we need to move away from the heavy reliance we have on the local property tax. Again, I would not be for eliminating it completely. I would go to a 50%, from 32 to 34% state share to an average of 50%. Again, some school districts are higher than that now, but I'm talking on average and with protections for local property taxpayers to make sure that their tax rates are not through the roof as they are now. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I think the way we fund public education now, with this heavy reliance on the local property tax, we're drifting into the sense that education is purely a local responsibility financially, and it's not. This is something that we all have a shared responsibility, and there has to be some local skin in the game, but this is a state responsibility that we share together as citizens of Pennsylvania. And I think moving away from the 32%, pushing that up to 50%, would actually reinforce the idea that this is something that we all share. This is a responsibility that we all share in supporting, and that I think that 50% would take us to where we need to be in terms of reducing that reliance on the property tax.
John, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, we've talked a bit about the $1 billion reduction. Each of you have referenced that here this evening. The standard rejoinder from the administration is that $1 billion was federal stimulus money that was there and then went away. They will then tell you that in each of the last 3 budget years that they've ratcheted up support for the basic education subsidy, which is the biggest piece of public money that goes to public schools. I would ask each one of you if you can show me, in light of that, specifically where this $1 billion reduction in spending was, given the fact that the basic subsidy in each of the last 3 years has gone up.
We'll start with Rob and go down.
Sure, it's all in the in-classroom services specifically, so you can't count the pension spike, an employer contribution as an investment in current education. That's a bill that the employers slipped out on previously, and there was a negotiated settlement sort of collared. So that's silly. Second, saying, oh, well, the federal government, they were paying for it, so we're not going to make up for what was there. It was there because there was a federal emergency. Other states have made up for that money in investing in education. Other states all around us. Other states aren't running the kind of deficit that Tom Corbett is all around us. Other states are beating us in job creation in the private sector, not states in the Southwest. So, in example after example, Tom Corbett's approach has failed to do the job creation that leads to the revenue that will allow us adequately to fund education. He hasn't allowed for inflation. He's over-counting contributions for legitimate contributions for pensions, but he neglects to mention he found 154% of the replacement dollars for prisons. So the school-to-prison pipeline is alive and well, and he should have been doing sentencing reform. He should have been embracing, all he had to do a silly thing and talk to his actual employees, corrections officers, to reduce the cost of corrections. That's not an investment. Investment in K through 12 is an investment. He never should have ended the partial reimbursement for charter schools. Those costs now mean charter schools are getting funded by damaging mainstream public schools. So those are a few examples, John.
Katie.
Well, listen, if you redefine something enough times, I guess you can always claim that it's the biggest, the best, the whatever. Well, what Tom Corbett is doing is taking a category that is most critical, which is those dollars that go directly into the classroom, and adding things in like transportation costs and costs for buses and pension costs and things like that to make the number look bigger than it is, number one. Number two, when he presented that first budget, this was something he was proud of. He was coming in and cutting government, and he's proud of it until now, election year. He's not proud of it, and oh, I've got the biggest budget for education when he's had that pushback, rightly so, from parents so concerned about what's happened. If you need any reassurance about what's the right way of seeing this issue, just ask any parent whose child now has no counselor, has no ability to participate in the afternoon sports without paying $150. John, here's the numbers. The governor came in. Yes, the federal stimulus had gone away, but like I said, crocodile tears, he wasn't for it anyway. But he did inherit a $1.4 billion revenue surplus. He chose to cut education, to put that money into things like the prison industrial complex. And then when it came time as to whether he would stand with a bipartisan group of legislators who wanted to restore the money through a shale severance tax, he said, no, I'm more loyal to Grover Norquist of the Tea Party than I am to school kids in Pennsylvania. Those are the numbers. That's what happens. In an election year, it's more than understandable that he would regret the decisions that he made early in his term.
Okay, Allison.
Yeah, and I don't think I have to repeat some of the numbers, and you've heard them. I certainly agree that there are fewer dollars coming to our schools, and that's really the point here. So Tom Corbett wants to have an argument about whether he made it up or whether he did put different. He put a block grant and he put things that sounded the same all together and then reduced the amount and called it efficiency, and put in pensions and put in other pieces. The fact is, where do we go from here? That's the issue. Tom Corbett still believes that we don't need to put more money in education. He thinks there's enough money in education. And no one else, you ask any parent or teacher or school district that has to raise their taxes or has had to cut school counselors and teachers and really seen that loss. And we've seen those numbers are staggering. In Pittsburgh, it was a 15% cut. In Philadelphia, it was a 23% cut. Every school district in Lancaster County saw a cut. Everyone saw a cut. These are real dollars to our school districts. The issue for the next governor is not arguing really with Tom Corbett about whether he actually made up for those dollars or not. It's how do we move forward? How do we make sure that we educate our children going forward? And what we need to do is to make sure that the next governor is committed to education, knows how to do it. I was a Democratic chair of the Education Committee for 10 years. I worked on 2 fair funding formulas. One with Governor Casey, where one of the big issues was rural school districts not having enough funding. The next one was with Governor Rendell, where I worked to make sure that we did make an investment in reimbursing school districts for full-day kindergarten. Tom Corbett took that away. It's one of the smartest things we can do is to make sure that kids start school ready to learn and that we have a full-day kindergarten program. And I would restore the funding reimbursement for full-day kindergarten. I would actually make sure that we use some of those, that severance tax, so that we could have universal pre-K for 4-year-olds. We should have children start school ready to learn and to succeed. That saves dollars as well. So we need a governor who understands how to get this done, understands what education not only means to us personally, but means to our state, and the role that the governor and the General Assembly plays in not only looking backwards, but looking forward to make sure that we do it right for the future.
All right, Tom Wolf, and then we're going to move on to the next question. Go ahead.
Yeah, John, I think the question is, did funding leave the school systems? And the answer is yes. $1 billion left the education of our children. And you can parse that any way you want, but $1 billion left the school system. And that's $1 billion less that we had when Tom Corbett became governor to teach our children. And these were jobs in the classroom, and 20,000 teachers lost their positions. The school district my daughters went to school in York County, they're struggling. The second poorest school district in York County, they're struggling because of these cuts. Everybody's struggling, and everybody's trying to make up from the people, what they're doing, the teachers, the administrators in the schools, to the local taxpayers who are bearing the burden of this cut in state support. This was a real cut in education. It was a bad choice, and to blame it on the idea that one source of revenue came, I mean, those are crocodile tears. I mean, that's what a governor faces. From year to year, your revenue sources will change. You'll have ups and downs with the economic cycle, regardless of whether you have stimulus or not. No one forced Tom Corbett to be governor of Pennsylvania. This is one of the things he bought. He was there to decide what the priorities of the state are, and he, for whatever reason, decided that education is not a priority. I think he's now rethinking that, but he did take $1 billion out of public education, and that there's no mistaking that.
All right, Pete Montine for Katie McGinty.
I have two really good questions, and I'm struggling with which one to ask, but I guess I'll ask this one since we are on a college campus, and it's a bit of a personal one for me. What would you do to keep young people in Pennsylvania from moving to Baltimore, to D.C., to New York? And what would you do to bring young people into Pennsylvania? Retention, and how would you do that?
Expansion.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we are focused on a lot of our challenges.
One thing, sorry.
One thing.
I meant to clarify, just one thing. The biggest specific thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Look, we are focused on a lot of our challenges, but you can't be in a fine institution like Franklin and Marshall and not recognize that one of the great things that we have is an asset in Pennsylvania, and one of the reasons why it's so unacceptable that we are doing so poorly in job creation is when you ask people, okay, which state in the United States is #1 in the competing for and winning basic research and development grants, in the awarding of PhDs, and in the issuance of patents for that research? It's not California or Massachusetts, it's Pennsylvania. But what happens is Johnny, Mary, and Susie graduate, and Boston, Austin, and San Jose, they go. Listen, I've had the chance and opportunity to work in the private equity space, and I know what it means to a young entrepreneur when you put forward a few dollars so that that great research can spin out of the university and take root and take hold and take off in Pennsylvania. And I've put out there some proposals that would enable us to say, if you're willing to invest in a young entrepreneur in Pennsylvania, those investment dollars will be tax-free to you. And as that little company starts to grow and make revenues, that those revenues would be tax-free as that company is taking off and keeping young people here and keeping those ideas here. But it's also about the quality of life that we offer those young people who can move anywhere in this country or anywhere in this world. And that means that we need to be able to say, you move into downtown Lancaster, and certainly with Mayor Rick Gray, you're going to have a fine quality of life with culture and the arts and restaurants and a diverse economy and a diverse society. We need to invest in cleaning up our streets and making sure our streets are safe, and providing then especially that great education that we've been talking about. Because young people won't stay to build their families and build their businesses if they don't know that it's a place where their kids will get a great education.
Thanks. Allison?
Yeah, one of the things standing here, we're going to say, and we're standing in a wonderful college. It's a great place to start. We have over 400 colleges and universities in Pennsylvania. We should start by working with our colleges and universities and our business community to actually help make sure that young people who are getting educated here know that there are opportunities here. And one of the great things you can do is to make sure that they have an internship, spend a summer here, work in a company during the year, be able to get that experience, see what is here. Because we offer a great quality of life across Pennsylvania, great diversity in small towns and bigger cities and very rural areas. There are a lot of opportunities. But I know as a parent of 2 adult sons, I remember someone said this to me when I didn't have adult sons, and I didn't really believe it until I did, is we want our kids to be able to stay here. Now, sometimes they make a grandbaby, and that makes it even more important to be able to have them nearby. I know that very clearly with having a 1.5-year-old little granddaughter, and I'm thrilled that she's here in Philadelphia area, and so is my other son. So the fact is that the only reason they can be here is because there are job opportunities. We have to be able to build the economy. We have to embrace, again, what our great assets are. And we do have great assets. And some of it does come from the research and innovation. Done a lot of work on helping to make sure that biotech companies, because we do basic research here, also biotech companies can build those products and those ideas. Then we have great pharmaceutical companies that actually can hire them, sometimes buy out those companies. But the fact is that we do also have great opportunities with the energy, not just to drill that natural gas, but to look at and work with the universities to see what are the byproducts, what else, how else might we use them, how could we attract advanced manufacturers, because in fact it's really cheap energy to be able to be used. We have great opportunities here to grow the economy, to keep so many of the young people who are educated here to stay here, and maybe start their own companies as well. There are things we can do, and as governor, you need to identify those assets, work with those universities and colleges, really be able to work with those businesses, and I've done that to really bring that kind of opportunity for our young people and be able to have them stay.
One biggest thing, is there one single biggest thing that you would do? Is there anything that is top of mind for you?
Well, again, I think there's no single way to grow the economy. You know, you need to make sure that the government works and does what it's supposed to do.
But is it Keystone Opportunity Zones? Is it corporate tax breaks? I mean, is it, what is it?
I think it's a bigger concept than that. I mean, those are all tools. The bigger concept is identifying the assets and making sure that we can build on them. Sometimes in a community it means we need a transportation hub. Maybe in another community it means we need more recreational space. Maybe the downtown needs redevelopment. I've worked on a whole variety of ways to do this, whether it's riverfront development along the Delaware River, I've done some of that, or sustainable walkable communities that are located near a transportation asset like the regional rail lines, or it's looking at Pittsburgh that has reinvented itself as a city by saying, wait, we're losing steel, what else can we build on? And deciding that what they could build on was the great universities they had, and really built on biotech and engineering, and really it was led very much by political leadership. Mayor Murphy, who's supporting me, he and I worked together on this. He said, we have got to reinvent Pittsburgh, and Carnegie Mellon and University in Pittsburgh and Hines all got together. It's a great example, though, of what we can do in smaller communities and larger communities.
Tom.
I have to acknowledge my failure in this area. I have 2 daughters, neither of whom live in Pennsylvania. And,
you will be sorry later.
I'm already sorry. My wife and I are very sorry. My wife, a Franklin and Marshall graduate, by the way, are very sorry this. And so it is a failure, but it's something that I feel very deeply that we need to figure out a way to bring these young people who with talents back to Pennsylvania to devote their talents to take risk. And I don't think there's one big thing. I think Pennsylvania is a great place, and as Allison said, we need to really celebrate the things that we have here in Pennsylvania. One of my daughters is a geologist. She works in San Francisco. One's an architect who lives and works in Brooklyn. Both of them should be working here in Pennsylvania. We have everything that those places have and more, and I think we need to be more ambitious about telling people that Pennsylvania has those things, of exploiting those great resources. One of them is higher education. I don't know how to say this, but we have the second highest number of seats in higher education of any state in the United States. I think we're second only to New York. Is that right? And I think we need to take advantage of that, because young people, talented people come here from all over the world, but they leave. And we need to figure out how to keep them here, like my daughters. I think it's focusing on education. I think it's focusing on leveling the playing field and making sure that the welcome mat is out, that Pennsylvania is open for people of talent. Come here and create jobs. Come here and devote your talents. Take risk.
Yeah. I think I actually can answer. One thing, one word: invest. There are two different key ways I would invest. The first is providing, it's a business term, but risk capital, right? So it's a form of equity. Microloans for women and minority-owned businesses in Pennsylvania, focusing on trying to bring more jobs to less affluent communities, invest in job creation. Again, the Urban Institute reminds us we need to move more jobs to the less affluent communities, not just have them reverse commute away. But you can invest that way. The Ben Franklin program pays for itself. I think it's $3.70 back in tax revenue for after 5 years. And when I use the word invest, I'm being specific. Republicans love to say, oh, Democrats say invest, it's really a spend number. No, they're showing they're governing by talking point, and unlike a couple of us have never met a payroll, right? The fact is an investment yields a measurable return. So when the Ben Franklin programs, which have been cut by 80%, give you a 350, 370% return in 5 years, guess what that is? A heck of a return, a double-digit return. Plus, you're improving your ability to hold on to smart people going to all of these great schools. So we need to invest in those, but guess what? The old phrase, old dogs beg, young dogs hunt. We need to have a governor who understands what those young dogs, those entrepreneurial companies look and feel like. Similarly, the young entrepreneurs going to these schools, both from inside the state and outside the state, middle class people are having more trouble affording our great educational institutions. Guess what? Pennsylvania, in fact, gains more from an accountant going or a kid taking physics at, say, Westchester State or Pitt and staying in Pennsylvania than a phys ed undergrad who leaves for Arizona because there are no jobs here. Let's recognize reality. I would work on a bipartisan basis. We've got very smart Democratic and Republican chairs of the Appropriations Committee, Senate and House, and let's point out to people we can award college loans and forgive them based on number of years when they dwelling and paying what? Taxes in Pennsylvania. So actually having an invest and innovate governor can dramatically drive up the appeal of Pennsylvania for young entrepreneurs.
All right, yeah, we have about 15 minutes left, so let's try to get through as quickly as we can. So, John, you're next for Allison Schwartz. We'll see if we can get as many questions in as we can.
Absolutely. Congressman, in 2001, you voted against the legislative pension increase. But you also accepted the same 25% increase that was granted to state employees, which now pads out your congressional salary to something about the tune of $18,000 and a bit a year. Given the fact that you want to, if successful, you want to tangle with a $42 billion unfunded liability in the pension system, retrospectively, do you sort of regret taking the money, one, and two, could I ask you a bit about how you intend to tame that debt?
Sure, you're leaving out a little bit of the story there, actually. One of the reasons I voted against that was I did think it was too much, but there was a doubling for legislators. The legislators were offered 50%, not 25%, a 50% increase. I don't know why you left that part out, but that was pretty significant because that was one of the things I thought appalling, and I didn't take that. So what I did is I took the pension that everybody else was getting in state government. But I did not take the legislative.
But wouldn't a more emphatic no have been to not take any increase at all?
Well, yes, looking back, of course, I think it was overly generous. I spoke at the time that it was overly generous. I had an option. I had to not take the extra amount, and I signed it away and didn't take it. And so I thought that was really important. I wasn't given the option of not taking, I guess you don't have to take your pension, but I did take a pension. And I took the same as every state employee got. But I did think it was too much. And I think it was at a time that it felt like there was ample money. But I voted against it because I thought it was too big. And I voted against it particularly because I thought legislators were treated differently, and that was appalling. And so, and they reduced the number of years, which they've changed. So look, we should have Act 120, which made some changes, work. That is what we start with. And to make sure, I do think that state employees ought to get a pension, and I would protect that pension. As I say, the changes that were made, including the vesting time, which was too low at that, one of the reasons I voted against it as well, was corrected. So let's have that work. right? I mean, there are other things we should do. We should get a better return on our investments in the pension system. We've seen some changes recently and some questions about whether we've gotten all that we could back, or whether, you know, the investments are as sound as in some other states. So we have to get the best return on our investments. And then, yes, we do have to sit together and we do have to reach agreement on how we're going to handle the unfunded liability. But I will say this, is that I will meet that promise to state employees and to teachers to pay the pension that they were promised.
We'll start down here. We'll come back and get you all. Tom, any comment?
Yeah, to the general question
Yes,
about the
please.
pension issue. We do have a pension issue, and it's not a crisis. It's actually not a pension issue, it's a compensation issue. And I think we have to start by making sure that we keep the promises we made to state workers, including teachers. There are a couple things about a defined benefit pension plan. I've said this a number of times, but the first thing, there are three things. The first thing is, this is a compensation issue. It's not a pension issue. It's certainly not a crisis. We're not where Illinois is. And I know there's a sky is falling crowd saying there is a crisis. And if we keep kicking the can down the road, we're going to have one. So we have to deal with it, but it's not a crisis. When I was Secretary of Revenue, I often had trouble competing with the private sector to get good employees into the Revenue Department because our base compensation was generally not where the private sector was. But I could compete often by saying, but our benefits are good. Look at the insurance. Look at the pension. And by taking all those things together, I could actually compete. It wasn't a slam dunk, but I could compete. So we have to make sure that we understand as citizens of Pennsylvania that we have certain obligations to ourselves to make sure we're paying an adequate compensation overall to our state workers, including our teachers. Second, defined benefit pension plans, the liability, all else being equal, varies inversely with the interest rate environment. The lower the interest rate, the higher the pension liability. Right now, we're in a low interest rate environment. So as the interest rates come back to normal, as I believe they will, they're at zero right now, the pension, a big chunk of that pension, unfunded pension liability will go away. I know my CFO, Michael Newsom, is here with Lois, and I think our pension liability went down by 15% last year. And I don't think anybody really noticed a huge increase in the long-term interest rates, but that's how sensitive the liability is to those rates. So as interest rates come back, a chunk of that's going to go away. The third thing is, we do have a portion of that was there because of the employer not making contributions into the fund. While the employees were, religiously over the last 14 years, the employer, the Commonwealth, was not. And we do have to make that up, and we have to figure out a way to make up that gap, that 14-year gap, in a way that does not burden unduly the taxpayer. There's some really interesting, innovative ideas going around in the House and the Senate, both Republican and Democratic sides right now, including things like a pension obligation bond. We'd have to suspend parts of Act 120 to do that. And there's some other ideas, and as governor, I would look at that. The only thing I wouldn't do is kick the can down the road. I would look at innovative ideas as to how to fund this, and we can't afford to do that.
I would just ask.
Yeah, we're about a couple minutes away from the closing, so I want to let Rob and Katie get their comments in.
These are huge issues. Having somebody who's competent with pension plans also affects local property taxes. That's one of the reasons people have, they've seen my competence with managing the pension plans. We had real pension reform driving down the unfunded liability by more than $30 billion, working with people. But in the same way I celebrate young entrepreneurs, let's celebrate older senior citizens who've worked for decades. The average pension payment from the Education Pension Fund is $24,100 a year after 45 years of work. That is not something that should be prompting us to villainize. The other thing is you have in a Treasurer McCord who hopes to be a Governor McCord, somebody who celebrates the efficiency as well as the fairness of the defined benefit plan. Finally, Terry, in the benefit of trying to actually advance the conversation, not just say the same thing in forum after forum, I just want to make sure I understand, because it might just be a technical point, but last night Tom said, I'm quoting, I have a defined benefit plan at my company, so I think I have a sense of what we have to do here. I was under the impression, and I'm asking you to yield to Tom, that your company shut down the defined benefit plan and replaced it with a 401k plan in 2007. Is that wrong?
We actually have both, and there's Michael Newsom can actually speak to that if you want to get.
But I don't believe anybody knew. Nobody knew. I'm under the.
Hold on. Here's what we're going to do. We'll let Tom respond quickly, and we got to get to Katie. We're down to about 2 minutes before the closings. Go.
Yeah,
Go
we actually have a defined benefit plan that has been terminated, but it's still in place, and the employees. This is after I sold the business and left. Decided to move to a 401k, so we have both.
I'll come back to that.
Okay.
I think that's what
All
Tom
right,
Corbett's
Katie,
suggesting, by the way.
right,
I don't think that's a
Katie.
great precedent for the people listening. Anybody
All right.
depending on a defined benefit plan, that's exactly what Tom Corbett's suggesting. And
Okay.
what that means is you don't have a defined benefit going forward.
Katie, I want to give you,
we
you got about a
started-
minute and a half. Go ahead.
We started this conversation on the basis of looking at how toxic the atmosphere has become in and around politics, in and around our body politic. I think the question, John, that you raise is an example of how it becomes toxic. That the politicians now want to blame the public servant and blame and scapegoat teachers and make them out to be public enemy number one. The truth is that the root of the problem of our pension issues we have now started with politicians wanting to line their pocket with a very generous pension that they would not previously have qualified for, changing things like the vesting schedule, and then trying to say, but the pension structure is healthy enough that we can afford that with no other changes. And when that became unclear, the second huge mistake we made is, wow, we're not meeting these numbers, but we don't want to give up our pension. So let's go to Wall Street and the big high-flying hedge fund managers, and let's take the taxpayers' dollars and pay them hugely, which we have now done, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars a year in fees, and those hedge funds have not delivered the returns that they had promised. I do two things there.
You don't, I'm sorry, I hate to do this to you.
Change the vesting schedule
Go ahead.
and go after those hedge funds and tell them to deliver the dollars
Very
back
good.
to
You
the
got that in.
taxpayers that they had promised.
You got that. We wanted to, as Kim Lemon comes here for the closing, we wanted to have an engaging conversation with limited interruptions, so in the hopes that we would get them to converse back and forth, and I think we did that. Kim Lemon for closing.
Yes, and arbitrarily, we have selected these closing arguments, so we'll give you each a minute. If you'll begin, Katie, you are number one.
Thank you very much. Well, and thank you again, all of you, for coming and sharing this evening with us. We really are at a critical juncture in our Commonwealth, a state that has a great workforce, has great natural resources, has great local leaders who invest pride and imagination in our neighborhoods and communities. But this is a state now that has been so ill-served through rigid ideology, taken from 7th in job creation in the country down to 48th, to a point where the bond rating agencies are saying, your government is a gimmick, and we are going to punish you for that. Well, the story could be so much better. What I promise and what I bring is a person who has great vision for Pennsylvania. We can compete and win in advanced manufacturing and in an innovative entrepreneurial economy. What I bring is tested background, record in high public office, but not the old politics as usual. I ask for your vote, I ask for your support, and I thank you for being with us tonight.
All right, thank you, Katie. And Rob?
Yeah, look, I want to continue the conversation. I want to thank everybody. My older son, Jack, is going to be coming to Franklin and Marshall in September, so he's a great athlete. I hope to be sitting around watching him compete with some of the people in the audience. I think what I'll do is continue the conversation. Obviously, I'm hoping that you'll vote for Treasurer McCord, not a career politician, somebody who created thousands of jobs in Pennsylvania and then went in for the last 5.5 years doing, among other things, protecting seniors and their pension funds, because I'm best built to beat Tom Corbett and best built to get important work done, protecting workers and investing in a way that helps education. What the point Tom just made is a dangerous one. It's important, and we'll continue the conversation. Tom Corbett last year tried to shut down the defined benefit plan and say, we'll just move to 401ks and everything will be fine. That's called the great risk shift, so that the workers don't know what they'll be able to retire on. And we pointed out on a bipartisan basis, to Pete's point, using actuarial firms, that proposal would actually increase the unfunded liability. That is not the kind of approach we need. We need a real conversation in these closing weeks. It's not anybody but Corbett. It's the best alternative to Tom Corbett. Thank you.
All right, Tom Wolf, you're up.
Yes, I am offering a very different set of backgrounds, a very different story, and I think that this is a story that seems to be resonating with the voters of Pennsylvania. I am different than anybody else who's running right now, and certainly different from most people who have run before. In me, you get somebody who was actually a Peace Corps volunteer. I was an academic, an award-winning dissertation. I built a business twice, and I was Secretary of Revenue. I have done things in government and outside of government that I think give me the skills and experience to move Pennsylvania in the direction that I think we need to move. And I think we can do it. Pennsylvania is a great state. I have done interesting, good things, successful things throughout my career in a lot of different contexts. Those are the skills we want to employ in Pennsylvania. Those are the skills we need in the governor's office. We want someone who's going to do something, not occupy a seat. I want to be the next governor of Pennsylvania, and I really would love to have your support. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Tom. And Allison?
Well, I do think we need a governor, a different kind of governor, but someone who actually will bring the skills and the proven leadership to know how to get things done and willing and able to do that. And I do have to say that Tom has told a very nice story of his life and about the work that he has done, but I'm not sure it's so different. You've put on TV a story of your business, of how you've run your business as a very different kind of businessman. The fact is that the reality is you leave out a big chunk that's important, and that is that when you left the company, you paid $20 million to get out of the company, the buyout of the company, perfectly acceptable, it's what happens in business. But as a result of the indebtedness, and this is your own words, in 2009, the company had to restructure, and they had to lay off hundreds of people, and they lost their jobs. Somehow that part of the story is left out of your ads. You don't mention that part, that because of what they had to pay made a difference. I think we need to know we have a governor we can count on who will tell you the whole story.
We thank you all for joining us tonight. This has really been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Well,
Good to see you, Brian.
and on behalf of WGAL, PennLive, the Patriot News, Lancaster Newspapers, Lancaster Online, Franklin and Marshall College, we thank you for joining us tonight for the Susquehanna Valley Forum. Of course, the Pennsylvania primary is May 20th. Polls are open from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. In addition to the men and women who are running for governor, you will also be voting for the representative in the U.S. Congress and on the state level, and you'll vote for all members of the House and half of the senators. We thank you for joining us tonight, and good night.